Imagine plunging your arms elbow deep into a pit filled with dog excrement and human urine, the stench so overwhelming that your neighbors refuse to live within a quarter-mile of you. Imagine standing knee-deep in lime water that burned your skin, scraping putrid animal flesh hour after hour, knowing that one scratch from a contaminated hide could give you anthrax and kill you within days. This was the daily reality of the medieval tanner, one of the most despised yet absolutely essential craftsmen of the Middle Ages. Without their suffering, there would be no shoes for peasants, no saddles for knights, no armor for soldiers, no binding for the precious books that preserved human knowledge. Every step taken, every sword drawn, every page turned in medieval Europe depended on these men who worked in filth so others could walk in comfort. The journey of medieval leather began not in the tannery, but in the butcher's yard. When a cow, goat, sheep or horse was slaughtered for its meat, the hide was a valuable byproduct that could not be wasted. The medieval world operated on principles of total utilization that would shame our modern throwaway culture. A butcher in 13th century Paris or London would carefully remove the animal's skin, knowing that a tanner would pay good coin for it. The hide had to be delivered quickly, ideally within hours of the animal's death, because decomposition began immediately. If the tanner could not process the hide right away, he had only two choices: pack it in salt or dry it in the sun. Either method would preserve the raw material until he was ready, though dried hides would require extra soaking to restore their pliability. The butcher would remove the hooves and horns first, keeping those for other craftsmen who worked in bone and keratin, then deliver the hide with whatever blood, dung and dirt still clung to it. The tannery itself was a place that respectable citizens avoided at all costs. Medieval towns passed strict regulations forcing tanners to operate outside the city walls, usually downstream along rivers where the current would carry away their toxic waste. This was not mere prejudice, but practical necessity. The combination of rotting flesh, caustic chemicals, and human and animal waste produced an odor so powerful that it could be detected for hundreds of yards. Roman laws had restricted where tanners could work, and medieval authorities followed the same wisdom. In cities like London, Paris, and Cologne, the tanning districts became notorious neighborhoods where only the poor and desperate would live alongside these essential craftsmen. Archaeological excavations along the Danube River in Budapest have uncovered the remains of medieval tanneries, complete with their tanning pits, wooden tools, and remarkably preserved leather artifacts that tell us exactly how these workshops operated. When fresh hides arrived at the tannery, the first task was washing. The tanner and his workers would carry the heavy, blood-soaked skins to the river or to large wooden vats filled with water. They scrubbed and soaked the hides to remove every trace of blood that could discolor the finished leather, along with dung, dirt, and other contaminants. This initial cleaning might take several days, with the hides being repeatedly dunked, scrubbed, and rinsed. The medieval tanner understood that any impurities left at this stage would create permanent flaws in the final product. Running water was ideal for this purpose, which is another reason tanneries clustered near rivers and streams. The next step was perhaps the most revolting to modern sensibilities. To remove the hair from the hide and break down the proteins that held it in place, medieval tanners used a process called liming. The hides were submerged in pits filled with a mixture of water, slaked lime, and often urine. Human urine was collected from public facilities or purchased from those willing to sell it. The ammonia in urine helped accelerate the chemical breakdown. In some regions, tanners also used dog excrement or even pigeon droppings, which contained enzymes that loosened the hair follicles. The hides would remain in this foul bath for days or even weeks, depending on their thickness and the temperature. Workers had to enter these pits regularly to turn the hides and ensure even exposure. The caustic lime burned their skin and damaged their lungs over years of exposure. Many tanners developed chronic respiratory problems and skin conditions that marked them for life. When the hair finally loosened, the hides were pulled from the liming pits and draped over a curved wooden or metal surface called a beam. This is where the tanner's physical strength became essential. Using a crescent-shaped knife, he scraped both sides of the hide with powerful rhythmic strokes. On the outer surface, he removed the loosened hair along with the epidermis, the outermost layer of skin. On the inner surface, he scraped away any remaining flesh, fat, and the thin membrane of connective tissue that had once attached the skin to the animal's body. This process, called fleshing, required both strength and precision. Press too hard, and you could slice through the hide and ruin it. Press too lightly, and remnants of fat and flesh would cause the leather to rot from within. The scraps that fell from the beam were not wasted. Dogs waited eagerly for the fatty bits, as depicted in medieval illustrations showing tanners at work with their loyal hounds nearby. The hide that emerged from this scraping was called a pelt, a pale, soft material that resembled nothing like the original skin. But it was still not leather. Without further treatment, it would eventually rot and crumble. The transformation into true leather required the most critical stage of all, tanning itself. This process gave the craft its name and involved substances called tannins, complex organic compounds found primarily in tree bark. In England and much of northern Europe, oak bark was the preferred source. The bark was stripped from trees during spring and summer, when the sap was flowing and the bark separated easily from the wood. This valuable material was then dried for 2 to 3 years, an investment of time that speaks to the patience required in medieval manufacturing. Once dried, the bark was ground into a coarse powder using large stone mills pulled by horses or oxen, much like grain mills but designed for this tougher material. The ground bark was then soaked in water to extract the tannins. Cold water produced a lighter-colored extract but required longer soaking times, sometimes lasting several days. Warm water extracted the tannins faster, but produced a darker liquid that would color the final leather accordingly. The tanners learned to manipulate these variables to produce leathers of different shades and qualities. Some customers wanted pale leather that could be dyed bright colors. Others preferred the rich brown tones of heavily tanned material. Iron pots could not be used because the tannic acid would react with the metal and stain the liquid. Wooden, stone, or ceramic containers were the only suitable vessels. The actual tanning happened in a series of pits dug into the earth and lined with wood or stone. These pits contained progressively stronger solutions of tannin. The prepared pelts were first placed in weak solutions where the tannin could begin penetrating the surface without hardening it prematurely. Over weeks, the hides were moved to stronger solutions, with workers handling them daily to ensure even penetration. The tannin molecules bonded with the collagen fibers in the skin, creating crosslinks that made the material resistant to water and bacterial decay. This chemical transformation was irreversible, turning perishable animal tissue into stable, durable leather. The final tanning stage took place in what tanners called layaway pits, where the hides remained submerged in strong tannin solution for months. Some sources describe waiting periods of up to 12 months for the thickest cattle hides. During this time, the tanner could do little but wait and periodically check on his precious material. He had other hides in various stages of the process, of course, but each batch required this long investment of time. Modern people accustomed to instant manufacturing can barely comprehend the patience required. A hide delivered by a butcher in spring might not become finished leather until the following spring, an entire year later. When the tanner finally judged that the hides had absorbed enough tannin, they were removed from the pits and rinsed to remove excess chemicals. The leather was then hung in drying sheds, carefully positioned to dry slowly and evenly. Drying too quickly would cause the leather to become stiff and brittle. Drying too slowly risked mold and mildew. The drying sheds had adjustable shutters that allowed the tanner to control airflow based on weather conditions. Some tanners applied oils to the wet leather before drying, which prevented the material from becoming too rigid and helped achieve a supple final texture. But vegetable tanning with oak bark was only one method available to medieval craftsmen. In warmer regions around the Mediterranean, tanners had perfected alum tanning, also called tawing. Alum, a mineral salt, was dissolved in water along with egg yolks and flour to create a paste that was worked into the pelts. This method produced very pale, soft leather that was prized for fine gloves and luxury goods. The resulting material was called tawed leather rather than tanned leather, a distinction that medieval people took seriously. Alum tawed leather remained porous and could absorb dyes beautifully, making it the preferred choice for colorful aristocratic accessories. Another technique was fat tanning, sometimes called chamois tanning, because it was often used to produce the soft absorbent leather known as chamois. In this method, animal fats, brain matter or fish oils were worked into the pelts by hand. The fatty acids in these substances bonded with the collagen fibers in a different way than plant tannins, producing extremely soft and flexible leather. Brain tanning was particularly important because it allowed people without access to oak forests or alum deposits to still produce usable leather. The saying went that every animal had enough brain to tan its own hide, a rough but reasonably accurate observation. After the oils were worked in, the leather was dried, washed to remove excess grease, dried again, and then softened through a process called fulling, which involved vigorous pounding and stretching. The Moorish craftsmen of Córdoba in Spain became legendary for their leather, which they tanned using secret methods that combined elements of these various techniques. This Cordovan leather, made from goatskin, was so prized throughout medieval Europe that it gave its name to an entire class of craftsmen. When English crusaders returned from the Holy Land bearing examples of this magnificent material, they created a new demand that would reshape the leather industry. Shoemakers who worked with this premium leather called themselves cordwainers to distinguish themselves from common cobblers who merely repaired shoes with scraps and salvage. The cordwainer worked only with new leather of the finest quality, while the cobbler patched and mended with whatever he could find. This distinction points to the highly organized guild system that regulated leather crafts throughout medieval Europe. From the 14th century onward, different aspects of leather production and leather working were separated into distinct trades, each with its own guild. The tanners who processed raw hides into leather were one guild. The cordwainers who made new shoes were another. The cobblers who repaired shoes were sometimes forced under the authority of the cordwainers, a source of ongoing tension. Saddlers who made horse equipment, bag makers who produced pouches and purses, glovers who crafted fine handwear, bookbinders who covered precious manuscripts, all belonged to their own guilds with their own rules, secrets, and jealously guarded territories. Joining one of these guilds required years of dedication. A young man, typically between 10 and 14 years of age, would be apprenticed to a master craftsman. His father paid a fee to the master, who in return agreed to house, feed, and train the boy in the mysteries of the trade. For the first years, the apprentice learned only basic tasks. He carried water, maintained fires, cleaned tools, and observed his master at work. The guild masters were notoriously secretive about their techniques, refusing to teach the more advanced skills until they trusted the apprentice completely. A careless word to a competitor could betray secrets that had been developed over generations. The apprenticeship typically lasted between 3 and 7 years, depending on the complexity of the trade and local customs. During this time, the apprentice was legally bound to his master and could not leave or work for anyone else. He received no wages beyond his food and lodging. In exchange, he gained skills that would support him for the rest of his life. When the apprenticeship ended, the young man received a certificate documenting his training and became a journeyman. The word comes from the French journée, meaning day, because the journeyman was now paid daily wages rather than being a mere dependent of his master. But the journeyman's training was not complete. Medieval regulations required him to travel and work for other masters in different towns, sometimes for 3 years or more. He carried his certificate of apprenticeship and a special passport-like document that authorities would stamp as he passed through their jurisdictions. This wandering period served multiple purposes. It exposed the journeyman to different techniques and styles, broadening his skills. It prevented any single town from becoming flooded with excess craftsmen. It also proved that the journeyman could adapt and succeed in unfamiliar environments. During his travels, a journeyman might work in a dozen different shops, each time learning something new that he would eventually incorporate into his own practice. Only after completing these wandering years could a journeyman settle down and aspire to become a master himself. This required producing a masterpiece, a work of sufficient quality to prove his expertise to the guild. For a cordwainer, this might be an elaborately constructed pair of shoes. For a saddler, perhaps a complete saddle with all its straps and decorations. The guild masters would examine this work with critical eyes, looking for any flaw that might disqualify the candidate. Even if the masterpiece was accepted, the journeyman might wait years before actually being elevated to master status. The guilds strictly limited how many masters could operate in any given town, reducing competition and protecting the incomes of existing members. Sometimes a journeyman had to wait for his own master to die before he could take over the workshop. The economic importance of leather in medieval society cannot be overstated. Every person, from the lowest peasant to the highest noble, needed shoes. Soldiers required leather for their armor, sword belts, scabbards, and horse equipment. Monasteries consumed vast quantities of leather for bookbinding, an essential part of preserving religious texts. Farmers needed harnesses and reins for their draft animals. Workers in every trade wore leather aprons, gloves, and protective gear. The leather trade touched every aspect of medieval life, making the tanner's despised labor absolutely essential to the functioning of society. Consider the range of products that emerged from medieval leather workshops. Shoes came in countless varieties, from simple leather wrappings for the poor to elaborately decorated boots for the wealthy. In the late Middle Ages, fashion took shoe design to extremes, with points extending so far beyond the toes that they had to be supported by chains attached to the knee. Patterns, wooden or metal platforms that strapped beneath leather shoes, kept the wearer above muddy streets. Multiple layers of thick leather were stacked to create durable soles that could withstand miles of walking on rough medieval roads. Belts were far more than simple accessories. They supported swords, pouches, and purses, while also serving as status symbols that proclaimed the wearer's wealth and position. A nobleman's belt might be decorated with brass or silver fittings, dyed in rich colors and tooled with intricate patterns. A peasant's belt was plain but no less essential, holding tools and keeping rough clothing in place. Belt pouches, the medieval equivalent of wallets and purses, hung from these belts and contained coins, keys, and personal effects. The making of these pouches was itself a specialized craft. Gloves protected hands and also served as symbols of authority and pledge. A king might throw down his glove as a challenge. Accepting a lord's glove meant accepting his protection. Fine gloves of soft, alum-tored leather were luxury items worn by nobles and wealthy merchants. Working gloves of heavier leather protected craftsmen from the hazards of their trades. Falconers wore special gloves reinforced to withstand the talons of their birds. Each type of glove required different leather and different construction techniques, but perhaps the most fascinating application of medieval leather was in armor. While metal armor gets most of the attention in popular imagination, leather played crucial roles in medieval warfare. Leather was lighter than metal, far cheaper, and when properly treated, remarkably resistant to cuts and punctures. The technique called cuir bouilli, French for boiled leather, transformed ordinary leather into a material that some medieval writers claimed was nearly impervious to iron. The exact recipe for cuir bouilli was a closely guarded secret, and modern researchers have spent decades trying to rediscover it. We know it involved vegetable-tanned leather, water and heat, but the precise details remain elusive. Experiments have shown that immersing leather in very hot or boiling water causes it to shrink dramatically and increase in thickness. 40 seconds in boiling water can reduce leather to 2/3 its original size, while roughly doubling its thickness. The resulting material is rigid, dense, and capable of being molded into complex shapes while still hot. It could be carved and decorated like clay before hardening permanently. Some sources describe soaking leather in hot wax or oil rather than water, producing a similar hardening effect with different properties. Wax-hardened leather was highly water-resistant, useful for armor that would be exposed to rain and sweat. The exact methods varied by region and individual craftsmen, with each master developing personal techniques that he passed down to trusted apprentices. What all cuir bouilli shared was the transformation of flexible leather into rigid plates or scales that could deflect blows and protect vital areas. Medieval soldiers wore cuir bouilli in many forms. Breastplates, shoulder guards, and arm protections could all be made from hardened leather at a fraction of the cost of metal equivalents. The brigandine, a popular form of medieval armor, consisted of small metal plates sandwiched between layers of leather or fabric. This construction offered excellent protection, with good flexibility and relatively light weight. Even horse armor sometimes incorporated boiled leather, protecting valuable war horses from sword cuts and lance thrusts while remaining lighter than equivalent metal barding. Shields, sword scabbards and protective cases of all kinds were made from cuir bouilli. Archaeological finds have recovered leather scabbards, purses and other objects from medieval tannery sites, preserved by the wet, acidic soil conditions that prevent decay. These artifacts show sophisticated construction techniques, including openwork decoration, where patterns were cut through the leather to create intricate designs. Examples from Budapest and other excavation sites reveal that medieval leatherworkers achieved technical and artistic levels comparable to craftsmen anywhere in the world. The daily life of a tanner was harsh by any measure. He worked long hours in conditions that would be illegal in any modern country. He stood for hours at the beam, using upper body strength to scrape hide after hide. He waded into caustic pits that damaged his skin and lungs. He handled materials contaminated with anthrax and other deadly diseases that lurked in animal hides. The smell of his workplace permeated his clothing, his skin, his hair, making him immediately identifiable and socially undesirable. Few people wanted to marry into a tanner's family or live near his workshop, yet tanners earned reasonable livings in most places. The demand for leather was constant and could not be avoided. Towns needed tanners just as they needed butchers, bakers, and blacksmiths. Some tanners ran successful businesses, employing journeymen and apprentices and supplying leather to multiple workshops of cordwainers, saddlers, and other craftsmen. In some regions, tanning families maintained their businesses across generations, with sons following fathers into the trade despite its unpleasant reputation. The guild system protected tanners from excessive competition and guaranteed minimum prices for their products. The tannery itself was a complex facility requiring substantial investment. The wooden vats for soaking and liming had to be replaced regularly as they rotted from constant exposure to water and chemicals. The tanning pits, dug into the earth and lined with timber or stone, represented permanent infrastructure that could take years to properly prepare. The drying sheds needed careful construction to allow air circulation while protecting the leather from rain and excessive sun. A well-equipped medieval tannery might occupy half an acre of land along a riverbank, representing a significant capital investment even by the standards of the time. Archaeological excavations at the medieval tannery site in Budapest revealed 4 distinct tanning pits containing cherry stones, an interesting detail that tells us something about the daily life of the workers. They ate cherries while working, spitting the pits into the pits where they accumulated over decades. The site also yielded wooden and iron tools used in the various stages of leather production, allowing modern researchers to understand exactly how medieval tanners worked. The preservation conditions were excellent because of the wet soil, giving us remarkably complete examples of medieval leather goods, including shoes, scabbards, purses, and utility objects. The relationship between tanners and the other leather craftsmen was complex and sometimes contentious. Guild regulations specified exactly what each trade could and could not do. Tanners produced the leather, but were generally forbidden from making finished goods. Cordwainers could make new shoes, but could not repair them. Cobblers could repair shoes, but often could not make new ones, though they frequently violated this rule by assembling cheap footwear from salvaged materials. Saddlers jealously guarded their monopoly on horse equipment. Each guild suspected the others of encroaching on its territory, and disputes between guilds were common in medieval court records. Despite these tensions, the leather trades formed an interconnected economy that kept medieval society functioning. The butcher killed the animal and sold the hide to the tanner. The tanner processed the hide and sold the leather to the cordwainer, saddler, or other craftsman. The craftsman made the finished product and sold it to the customer. Each step added value, and each specialist developed skills that no generalist could match. This division of labor was the foundation of medieval urban prosperity, allowing levels of quality and productivity that no single craftsman working alone could achieve. The finished leather products of the medieval world have largely crumbled to dust, destroyed by the centuries of use and eventual decay that claims all organic materials. But enough has survived in privileged conditions, whether preserved in dry Egyptian tombs, waterlogged European bogs, or the foundations of buildings, to tell us that medieval leatherworkers achieved remarkable levels of skill. Their shoes show sophisticated construction with multiple pieces precisely fitted together. Their decorated goods display artistic sensibilities as refined as any other medieval craft. Their practical items, from water bottles to book covers, demonstrate engineering solutions to everyday problems. The tanning industry would eventually be transformed by the Industrial Revolution, when chromium-based chemicals replaced vegetable tannins and mechanized processes replaced hand labor. Modern tanning takes days rather than months, and the ancient stench has been contained, if not eliminated, by industrial processes and environmental regulations. But for more than 1,000 years of European history, from the fall of Rome to the rise of industry, leather was made by men standing in pits of excrement, scraping hides on curved beams, and waiting patiently for tree bark to work its slow transformation. Without their labor, knights could not ride, monks could not read, and peasants could not walk. The hidden world of the leather workshop was unpleasant, dangerous, and essential, a foundation stone of medieval civilization that we walk upon still today, even if we have forgotten the hands that laid it.